Walter Proctor had come to visit Saleh Clark following the unexpected and mysterious passing of his great-uncle Caleb Proctor. Walter and his brother Frank were the sole heirs of their moderately well-off Uncle Caleb, who had lived as a recluse on his farm in northern Connecticut. The two young men had been jolted at the news of his sudden and mysterious demise, but were both in need of their inheritance. Frank had recently totaled his car and Walter was wanting to marry. However, there had been a hitch in the legalities. The trust that handled their uncle's affairs wanted proof of his passing. His body had never been found, and not a penny would be remitted without this absolute proof. While his brother Frank still lay bandaged on a hospital bed, Walter had made the trip to the little farming community of Libertyville and now sat with his uncle's friend, Saleh Clark. He had been told that the elderly farmer, whose property was adjacent to his late uncle's, could give him all the information he needed. The tall, gaunt and grey-bearded elder, wearing an ancient suit and felt hat and with toil-hardened hands, spoke with a surprisingly cultured accent. Of annoyance to Walter was his manner of scrutinising and almost deriding his guest, while also professing ignorance regarding his uncle's demise. Nobody knew what had happened to his Uncle Caleb, he explained. His neighbour had lived alone and presumably perished in the swamp, where indistinct footsteps had led. Folks believed he had gone there to fix a fence or look for one of his cows. In the darkness, he had fallen in and sank beyond help. The authorities had poked around with poles in the swamp, but it was bottomless and a dangerous place to be avoided. He warned Walter against going there, with again that patronising sneer and jeering laughter disguised as helpfulness. However, Walter was shocked when the man suddenly erupted in anger, talking about a missing wine bottle. Clark claimed that a bottle they had sealed 25 years ago tonight was gone, as was Walter's Uncle Caleb, who would have known where it was. At that point, Walter glanced through the farmhouse door and was surprised to see a dress suit hanging, carefully pressed and of fairly recent fashion. Observing Walter's surprise at the incongruity, Clark asked him if he had heard of so-called last man organisations, which also did have to do with his uncle. The organisations dated from the 17th century, when 12 gentlemen had been accustomed to gathering at a boat club at Henley-on-Thames in England. They had agreed to meet and dine once a year at the boathouse until the surviving man of the 12 dined alone. Clark, his Uncle Caleb and other professionals in the area, including local doctors and lawyers, had belonged to such an organisation and met annually over the last 25 years. Every year, on the 18th of October, they would partake in a banquet and drink a toast to the departed members. For want of a better place, they had met in the upper story of the exhibition house of the local fairgrounds, where they were served by a caterer from Hartford. He went on to tell Walter that 3 members had passed away during the year. At their last banquet, there were only 4 members remaining. Walter's Uncle Caleb, the 4th youngest member, had offered the toast, little knowing that he drank it to himself. Clark concluded with a nasty chuckle at Walter's discomfiture. He described the group's rituals. 8 vacant places had been set at the banquet last year, as if the departed were present. Alongside the dishes, tall candles stood, burning in memory of those who would no longer dine with the Brotherhood. At 10 o'clock, all lights were extinguished save the candles, and as the secretary, Uncle Caleb, called the roll of the departed, all candles were snuffed out one by one. A short period of silent prayer followed in the darkness. 3 of the 4 who attended the last banquet were now deceased, so tonight, as the last of the 12, Clark would be dining alone. In addition, all of the property of the club would revert to him. For an instant his eyes lit up, then clouded as he recalled that the wine they had sealed 25 years ago should be opened tonight, but was gone. As the secretary, Uncle Caleb would have known where the wine is, but was not around to inform him. It wasn't right that he would be unable to open that wine. Clark now sat there brooding, the laughter gone from his eyes and replaced by a strange look of fear. He suddenly turned on Walter, ordering him off his property while shrieking that he looked like Caleb Proctor. Thunderstruck, Walter left Clark fuming on the porch and went to find a place in the village where he could stay for the night. He ended up at Mrs. Woodbury's boarding house on the Libertyville Turnpike. The old-fashioned but comfortable room had a view of a cottage garden and a nearby group of buildings which Mrs. Woodbury informed him was the Libertyville Fairgrounds. She explained that the upstairs was a general meeting place, whereupon Walter let on that he knew about Saleh Clark's banquet tonight and introduced himself as Caleb Proctor's grandnephew. He was staying in the area to find out what he could about his unexplained passing. Slowly the story came out that Proctor and Clark had been legal partners, Proctor honest and well liked, while Clark had swindled many poor widow women. The partners also loved the same woman, whom Proctor had finally won. That had broken up their business, and Clark had never forgiven him. The woman was Walter's great-aunt Betsy, whom he barely remembered as she had passed when he was 10. He knew that his great-uncle had not remarried, while, Mrs. Woodbury added, Saleh Clark had never married at all. After the partnership break-up and years of rivalry, people were surprised when the two men established farms side by side 20 years ago. Publicly they were on speaking terms, but she cautiously told him there was speculation about their recent dealings and some cash that his uncle reputedly kept on his farm. They had both wanted to buy a neighbouring farm with a brook and had been heard quarrelling about it near the woods. Proctor wanted the water source, but Clark's motive was to squeeze a young sawmill owner with a power right by diverting the stream. The rich and grasping man did not need the money, but after losing Betsy, he had become obsessed with hoarding wealth. It wasn't long after the overhead altercation that Caleb Proctor disappeared. Mrs. Woodbury had voiced her suspicions of foul play to the state's attorney at Highfield, but he had laughed and said that the evidence was plain enough that Caleb had fallen into the swamp. Mrs. Woodbury would say no more, but after dinner Walter set off on a walk through the fields to the fairgrounds hall. There he climbed the stairs and eventually entered the great barn-like dining hall where an elderly head waiter was setting a long table with white linen, dishes and silverware. There were 12 places set, at which 11 stood candles. The waiter disclosed that it was his 5th year of setting places for the dinner, and that with only one dinner to be served, he would be heading home immediately afterwards. The after-dinner ceremony he described as damnable, saying that he hadn't slept for weeks after last year's. He had watched it from a false attic above, which had a ventilation shutter that could be used as a peephole. The waiter also mentioned the lost bottle of champagne, saying that Clark was greatly upset about it. Walter suddenly felt compelled to scale the ladder in the anteroom and observe the ceremony from the false attic. Unknown to the waiter, he clambered up to the cramped space and found a posse from where he could observe below, just as Saleh Clark entered the hall. Now elegant in his evening clothes, he advanced to his place at the head of the table, where the subservient waiter brought him what appeared to be an excellent meal. Appearing nervous, Clark ate little and soon gestured to the waiter to leave. Sitting there alone, he seemed to be seized by fear, until he finally rose and started to extinguish the table lamps one by one. He stopped at the last one, as if reluctant to put it out and be left alone in the gloom, gazing around him in terror. Rather than switch off the lamp, he started to relight another, until his arm seemed to be jerked back and the last lamp snapped out. He stood in the dancing candlelight of 11 tapers set at places for the deceased. Steadying himself, he seemed to need all his strength for the following ritual, as, mumbling names, he snuffed out one candle after another before standing motionless in front of the last 3, representing those who had passed away during the year. The 3 candle flames bent in one direction, as if a breeze blew across them, while a sudden screech of terror came from Clark's lips as he began to back away from some fearsome sight he was witnessing. The cringing man fell with a thud into his own chair as vague forms began to emerge from the shadows. Apparitions of 8 elderly men materialized, all wearing dinner clothes, of which some were very outdated, and took their places at the table. As they now feasted on some phantom banquet, the 3 chairs where the 3 candles burned still remained vacant. As if from his own mind, Walter heard a deep voice from the end of the table declaring that it was now 10 o'clock and that the men needed to remember their departed brothers by drinking to their memory. As Clark sat there terror-stricken, each man pushed his chair back and rose, holding a wine glass now filled with sparkling amber fluid. The spirit at the end of the table declared, "Call the roll," to which another voice responded by calling the name of each absent brother. First one spectre, then the second missing brother, appeared, and their candle was extinguished. Then came the name of Walter's great-uncle, Caleb Manfred Proctor, the 3rd brother to pass away during the year. The ethereal diners waited as a strange form seemed to be trying to emerge from the shadows, but did not appear. Saleh Clark was half out of his chair, trembling, breathless and staring. A rasping sound came from his throat as he was asked to tell the group where his neighbour Caleb Proctor was. Suddenly he became defiant, jeering at the spirits that he did not know that he was not Caleb Proctor's keeper. The spiritual conversation continued as the voice became vehement, accusing Clark of committing a dishonourable act, besmirching the integrity of the Brotherhood. Clark's response was to damn them all back to hell. Again the voice came, asking Clark why the grass in the corner of his east pasture fence grows so green. After another curse-ridden response from Clark, the strange voice ordered, "Open the wine." Suddenly Walter realised that a glowing bottle of golden champagne had appeared on the table in front of the gathering, which one of the spirits picked up and took to Clark's side. The voice ordered Clark, as the last of the 12, to open it and drink to his friends. Clark had seemingly collapsed, his breathing laboured, but obeyed the order. But after the pop of the cork and hiss of the liquid, came the sound of smashing glass as the room was bathed in brightness. Walter momentarily glimpsed Clark sitting alone at the table, clutching the broken bottle and staring down with a look of horror and despair on his face. This was followed by blackness as Walter crept down from the attic and ran back across the fields to his room. He awoke late the next morning when Mrs. Woodbury knocked on his door and told him she had some news. Saleh Clark had passed away during the night. While at what she called his ridiculous banquet, he had had a mishap, accidentally breaking a champagne bottle and severing the artery in his right wrist. The caterer had found his lifeless figure that morning. Later that day, Walter and the state attorney investigated and found his uncle's body in the fence corner of Saleh Clark's east pasture. Beside it was a rifle identified as Clark's and the crime weapon. The authorities were also later to find $15,000 bills still in Caleb Proctor's wallet in Clark's desk in the bedroom of his farmhouse.